Hello again and welcome back to APHA's 15 on COVID-19 series. Today we'll be talking about the use of NSAIDs in COVID-19. Once again, my name's Dan Zlott. I'm the Vice President of Education here at APHA. My background is in immunotherapy, oncology, and immunology. With that, let's go ahead and dive in. I have nothing to disclose. The learning objectives for today's activity. At the end of the activity, you should be able to discuss the latest developments related to COVID-19. So for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, what is the 15 on 19 series? It's a regular education series that's designed to provide education about various aspects of COVID-19 disease, help you separate fact from hypothesis or rumor, and today we're going to see a lot of that. And of course, to provide 15 minutes of CE for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. So what are the ground rules for our series? Episodes will be 15 to 20 minutes in length so that you can quickly get the info that you need. Each episode is dedicated to one particular topic. We'll attempt to clearly state whether each idea is concept, fact, hypothesis, or rumor or fiction. Just because there's so much information coming out about COVID-19, it's easy to get confused. And if you're not careful, it's easy to mix these things up. Again, we're going to see a great example of that today. Information on COVID-19 is changing daily. So what's true today may not be true tomorrow. Likewise, what's hypothesis today may be fact tomorrow. Things that are rumor or fiction probably will still be rumor or fiction tomorrow, but we'll check it out just in case, and if there's any updates, we'll try to let you know. That said, it's your responsibility to stay informed. We'll do our best to update information that becomes out of date, but we can't guarantee the accuracy of information past the date of presentation. Information in presentations is, of course, the opinion of the speaker and does not necessarily reflect the opinion or guidance of the American Pharmacist Association. Again, our lawyers are happy. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the real reason. So NSAIDs in COVID-19. Use them, don't use them. Well, I think it's time to call the bluff. And what do I mean by bluff? Bottom line up front. The recommendations regarding the use or the avoidance of use of NSAIDs in COVID-19 disease are entirely anecdotal and hypothetical, and we're going to explore that a little bit more deeply throughout the rest of today's episode. So there is currently no data whatsoever regarding the use or avoidance of NSAIDs in COVID-19 disease. None, and you'll see what I mean when I say none. There's none. Recommendations, anything you've heard or not heard, are based on hypotheses and extrapolations of inconclusive data in other viral respiratory illnesses. So let's take a look. So I actually, have been on PubMed a lot lately, like I suspect a lot of you have, and I started looking for what type of information was available regarding the use of various NSAIDs in COVID-19 disease. And these are screenshots from my searches. So let's start off with one NSAID, naproxen, COVID-19 naproxen. And here are my search results. No documents match your search terms. Okay, well, no problem. That's naproxen. Let's try another one. Ketorolac. That's a commonly used IV NSAID, maybe given the severity of disease and everything else, and the fact that a lot of the reporting is coming from hospitals, maybe we'd see some information about ketorolac. Nope, still no match. So I continued searching for just about every NSAID I could think of. And they're listed here for you. Diclofenac, diflunisal, etodolac, phenoprofen, floxifenine. Hadn't heard of that one before. It's not available in the United States, so if you haven't heard of it either, don't be surprised. Flurbiprofen, indomethacin, ketoprofen, meclofenamate, nabumetone, oxaprozin, piroxicam, solindac, tioprophenic acid, and tolmetin. Nothing. None of them have any search results. That's probably not a surprise. To be honest with you, I've been in practice now for almost 15 years. I haven't even heard of some of these drugs. I've never seen them actually in use, but just to be thorough, I looked up every NSAID I could lay eyes on. There's no data whatsoever out there. So you might be thinking, hey, I can think of an NSAID you haven't searched yet. And you're right, we'll come up to that in just a second. So next I said, you know what, let's be really broad. Let's take a look at COVID-19 and NSAID. And hey, look, we, we finally have some results. Before you get too excited, let's look at number 2. Number 2 is the expert consensus on chloroquine phosphate for the treatment of novel coronavirus pneumonia. So I opened the document. The abstract is available in English. It says nothing about NSAIDs or ibuprofen or anything like that. When you actually open the document itself, the full document, unfortunately it's in Chinese. I don't read Chinese, so the entire article may be about NSAIDs, but I don't believe so. And given the title of the document, that would certainly be unusual. So then the next document down, number 3, breakthrough chloroquine phosphate has shown apparent efficacy in the treatment of COVID-19 associated pneumonia in clinical studies. That's actually an article that we discussed on our very first episode, looking at antimalarials for the treatment of COVID-19. And that's a 2-page document that talks about all the great benefits of chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19, but doesn't provide any of the details about the data. So again, no mention of NSAIDs there. That one I've read. So then the first one I got excited about, an audio interview from New England Journal. So I opened that up. It's 15 minutes long. Listen to the whole thing. There were about 30 seconds in there where they talked a little bit about NSAIDs. It was very, very brief and in passing and really didn't provide a lot of data. So still, and it was just the editor's opinions. It was the group, it was their editor-in-chief, their managing editor, and one other editor. I apologize, I forget who that was. But they were discussing a whole bunch of different topics related to COVID-19, one of which happened to be NSAIDs. So nothing substantive there. It was their opinion. So finally, the last one you're thinking of is ibuprofen. I didn't list ibuprofen. I purposely did that last. And here, look, we see a couple of articles. Well, again, don't get too excited. If you actually open these articles, and I would encourage you to do that, the references are obviously there on the screen for you. They are news stories coming from the British Medical Journal. And so when you read into them, they really are news reporting. They're not academic research or academic reporting. And they're sort of chronicling some of the things that we'll talk about with a little bit more detail, but really no data here either. So no scientific data whatsoever for COVID-19 and NSAIDs. No matter which NSAID you look at, whether you look at NSAIDs as a class or if you look at ibuprofen, which is certainly the one we've heard the most about with in regard to COVID-19 disease. So let's go ahead and now take a deeper dive and see what's out there. So how did this all start? How did this whole controversy about NSAIDs in COVID-19 disease start? We heard it wasn't okay. Now it's maybe okay. It's created a tremendous amount of confusion. So how did this all start? Let's take a look at the timeline. So on March 11th, a researcher, Fang et al., published a letter in Lancet Respiratory Medicine with the following hypothesis. And I've got it linked here below, so if you want to take a look at it, check out that reference and look at it for yourself. It's a brief letter. It's 1 page, and actually the whole letter is right there for you. If you can pause it and blow up the screen, you might be able to read that. But here's the gist of their hypothesis. The COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2, binds to ACE2 receptors on the cell surface to gain entry into cells. That's a fact. Again, in the March 23rd episode of 15 on COVID-19 that we produced, we reviewed some of that information. So we know that that's fact. So that's a factual piece of information. Then they go on to say that ibuprofen has been shown to upregulate the expression of ACE2. That I'm going to call hypothesis. So there's a little bit of fact in there, but it's a pretty big extrapolation to say that that's universally true. So the reference I have listed here is from a 2015 article in Cardiology, and this is looking at the expression of ACE2 in rats that have been made diabetic by exposing them to a drug called streptozocin. Now, streptozocin is a nasty drug. We used to use it at NIH for the treatment of a very rare type of adrenal cancer. And it is a nasty drug. One of the main side effects it has is that it induces diabetes. So that's what they did to these rats. They used it to induce diabetes. And then they studied the effects of various drugs on the hearts of diabetic rats. And so that's where this information is coming from. That's the only article I could find linking ibuprofen specifically to upregulation of ACE2. There may be others out there. I wasn't able to find them. So that's the data there. So that's why I say I'm going to consider that mostly hypothesis. And then we go into their main hypothesis, which is that because SARS-CoV-2 binds to ACE2, and because ibuprofen has been shown to upregulate the expression of ACE2, therefore, the use of ibuprofen in COVID-19 patients increases or may increase the risk of severe or fatal disease. And that is pure hypothesis. It's conjecture. There's no evidence to back that up. They're just proposing a mechanism. So that's March 11th. On March 14th, we have the French Minister of Health, Olivier Véran, who takes to Twitter, and he says, taking anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen, cortisone, could be an aggregating factor for the infection. If you have a fever, take paracetamol, which is the European name for Tylenol or acetaminophen. Of course, he said it in French. He wrote it in French. My French is not good enough that I'm going to attempt to read that to you. However, that's now we have the French Minister of Health jumping in and jumping on board with this idea. Again, no evidence for this, just some conjecture. So next, on March 17th, the World Health Organization gets on board and issues a warning against the use of ibuprofen in COVID-19 patients. Again, still no evidence. There's no evidence today as of March 27th. I just looked this morning just to make sure that was still true. And we've got recommendations coming out of the World Health Organization. So then on March 18th, WHO changes its mind and tweets, at present, based on currently available information, WHO does not recommend against the use of ibuprofen in COVID-19 patients. And so Twitter being Twitter, multiple Twitter users lose their mind and they object to the use of a double negative to clarify an important message. And so maybe not the best way to communicate, but regardless, I think I understood where they're coming from. And I also have to say, I never in my life thought I would be quoting or citing Twitter in a serious presentation, but this is what happens when we rely on fact, or rather on hypothesis, and maybe some rumor to start issuing recommendations. So then on March 19th, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration comes out with a statement. At this time, the Food and Drug Administration is not aware of scientific evidence connecting the use of NSAIDs like ibuprofen with worsening COVID-19 symptoms. So, quite the series of events. And to be honest, this series of events was exactly the inspiration for the 15 on COVID-19 series. It's incredibly important for us as pharmacists, as healthcare providers, to understand the difference between rumors, hypothesis, fiction, and fact. When we start making recommendations, broad recommendations based on unproven hypotheses, that can create a ton of confusion. And in fact, this confusion is still out there today. If you talk to people, some people are under the impression that ibuprofen should be avoided in COVID-19. That may be the case, and data may emerge later that we should, but there's no evidence right now to suggest that. Likewise, there's no evidence that it's useful in COVID-19. So we're in a total black hole when it comes to how to address the use of NSAIDs in COVID-19. So is there any actual basis for concerns about NSAIDs in COVID-19 beyond the one that was stated there? Hypothetically, yes, and also hypothetically, no. Let's dive into that as well for just a second. So in the hypothetically yes camp, the inflammatory response we know is an important component of the immune response. Inflammation by definition is designed to help assist and upregulate or increase the immune response. So obviously NSAIDs being anti-inflammatories, if we suppress inflammation, we may inhibit the immune response, and that can, or theoretically could result in a more severe infection or an increased risk of morbidity or mortality. And this is true of multiple diseases, not just COVID-19. However, that is very much a hypothesis. In the no, there's no real concern camp, We definitely know that there's documented evidence that some of the severe complications from COVID-19 are the result of immune-mediated organ damage. If you take a look at our 15 on COVID-19 episode from March 24th, we reviewed a pathology report where there was very clear evidence of immune damage to the lung tissue in a patient who expired from the severe complications of COVID-19. So in theory, suppression of the inflammatory response may prevent or even may decrease the immune-mediated organ damage. So we really don't know. These are pure conjecture. There's no evidence one way or the other in COVID-19 disease. There has been some research in other viral and other respiratory illnesses. And if you want to go down a black hole one day, I would encourage you to explore that on your own. There's a lot of studies that say ibuprofen and NSAIDs are bad in those diseases. There are other studies that say they're useful in those diseases for control of symptoms and fever. So to my mind, based on my read of the available literature, it's inconclusive at best. So what's the bottom line? What are we as providers supposed to do when faced with the question of whether or not to use NSAIDs in a COVID-19 patient? Well, the answer is we do what we always do, which is to use our best judgment when we have to make that decision. I think we've pretty clearly shown there's no data one way or the other to support the use or avoidance of NSAIDs in COVID-19 disease. So I think what we would do next is to consider patient-specific factors. So, for example, is the patient currently on NSAID therapy? Are they on chronic NSAID therapy for osteoarthritis? Maybe they're on ibuprofen for osteoarthritis. Are they on something more unusual for a more unusual reason? Are they on Silindac for ankylosing spondylitis, for example? Those kinds of things need to be taken into account. What are the benefits of continuing the NSAID therapy, and what are the risks of maybe discontinuing NSAID therapy? So there's that balancing act, like always. Does the patient have any comorbidities or risk factors that would cause you to avoid NSAID use? So, does the patient have heart failure? Are they diabetic? Do they have renal dysfunction? Those are all things that may weigh into that decision and whether or not to use an NSAID in that particular patient. And then lastly, what's the goal of NSAID therapy in a COVID-19 patient? Is it for fever reduction? Is it for pain reduction? There's a lot of accounts out there of significant pain associated with various aspects of COVID-19. And so again, look at the risks and benefits. Are there alternative therapies that may accomplish the same goal? And what are the risks and benefits of those particular medications? So again, our job as pharmacists is to identify the medications that provide the greatest benefit while minimizing the risks to the patient. And so that same calculus is what we have to weigh when we're considering NSAIDs versus alternate therapies. All right, so that's it. That will wrap up today's episode of 15 on COVID-19. Our next 15 on 19 episode will be examining ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers in COVID-19, and that will be released on Monday, March 30th. We hope to see you on Monday. Do you have questions about COVID-19? Our goal here at APHA is to provide you with the information you need to educate yourself, your colleagues, and your patients about COVID-19. So if you have suggestions about topics you'd like to see us cover, please email us at covided@aphanet.org. And a big thank you to those of you who have already submitted suggestions. We are reviewing those, and actually today's episode was taken from some of those suggestions. Thank you so very much. We hope you have enjoyed this series and will continue to tune in, and we hope to see you on Monday.